Good evening and welcome to this slightly different edition of Agenda with me, Alex Wotton, where we're going to hear the full interview with the Chief Minister Howard Quayle after he announced he won't be standing for re-election this September after a decade in politics. In an extended interview, I ask him about his highs and lows, some controversial aspects of his political career, and of course the challenge no other Chief Minister has ever had to face: the global pandemic of coronavirus. Why now? In your own words, coronavirus, the most recent, but also the biggest challenge since World War II in many respects. It won't be over by September, so why are you stepping down now?
I made a promise to my family back in 2010 when I discussed standing in the 2011 general election that I felt we needed people to stand who weren't bothered about getting re-elected because tough decisions had to be made to get the economy balanced, sort out public sector pension debt so that we left a legacy to the next generation and their children that they wouldn't inherit a massive pension liability and a load of debt. And it needed people who weren't really politicians, who wanted to do their bit to work together to get the economy balanced, sort out public sector pensions, and then leave. And I was up until a certain event happening called COVID. We had the economy balanced, and we're building up a modest surplus, and we're on track to have enough of a surplus to cover the pension deficit, and we've obviously reviewed the pension liability, so going forward the fund is sustainable. So that was the aims, but then along came all sorts of things like beneficial ownership, which was a massive job, but that was behind the scenes. People didn't see that or understand the seriousness of the situation, which in a way is a good thing. But they obviously saw Brexit, again a massive amount of work, but that was overtaken. We've had a really good outcome for the Isle of Man, but that was overtaken by COVID. But I think, yes, I'm honouring a pledge, but equally, the back will be broken on it. We'll be living with COVID probably for the rest of our lives, but with a vaccine and the way we've come through it as an island, I think as an island, yes, it will be still around, but by the end of September, all the heavy lifting, fingers crossed, has been done, and the next administration can move on and deal with the other challenges that are coming our way.
Well, you mentioned that pledge. Did you ever consider changing it, altering that plan as the situation unfolded with COVID?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really flattering. One of the nicest things that's happened to me recently is an awful lot of people realised that I was going to honour the 2-term only pledge to my family. And I think sometimes you can become stale if you stay in politics too long. Maybe you start looking over your shoulder and coming up with policies that are short-term, popular short-term, but not right for the island long-term. And I never wanted to fall into that trap. So I think it's important that I've done my 2 terms. I've given it my absolute all. Now's the time for someone to come up and take the island forward, hopefully inheriting good, firm foundations. The economy's obviously taken a battering because of COVID, but it'll take another couple of years to get back to where I'd wanted it to be. But when you consider all things being equal, when surrounded by all the other countries of Europe and the United Kingdom, we're in a far better place than they will be. So yeah, it's very nice that a number of people have asked me to stand again, to stay on. But I think it's the time to go and let a new Chief Minister take the island forward.
Well, rewinding slightly, pre-COVID, if you can remember those times, in 2016, a number of your priorities were based around the economy, as you say, balancing the loss of the 200 million in VAT receipts down to 75. Have you been able to rebalance the economy to a level that you're happy with?
Yes, well, as we had a modest surplus pre-COVID, and now obviously that's come along and we've lost probably a couple of 100 million as a result of that. But I think the UK economy will bounce back. Ours didn't have the same disastrous consequences that the UK went through because we were able to remain open for 220 plus days in the period from June right through to the beginning of January. And as a result, an awful lot of businesses were able to open, pay the wages, mortgages able to be to be paid, food on the table. Some of our life assurance sectors have managed to grow during the period of COVID. But others, obviously some sectors, have taken an absolute battering, and as a government we've done our best to help those sectors with support till we can fully open our borders again. So yes, whilst it's going to take a couple of years to bounce back, I'm confident that with a good person steering at the helm and Tynwald working together, that then the economy can get back to where it was pre-COVID.
What would you say your biggest success has been over your time as Chief Minister?
I suppose, obviously, I suppose that's really for the people to judge, is the answer. I'm quite proud of the way the island handled the beneficial ownership situation, which most people won't understand just how serious it was. It was the biggest constitutional challenge to impact the island. It made the Radio Caroline debacle all those years back look like a walk in the park. And also there was a few thousand jobs at stake if I hadn't have fixed the problem and made sure that the island wasn't being forced to do something ahead of the rest of the world. Then I suppose obviously Brexit and COVID, you can't really say because losing lives, nothing's a success there. But I think as an island nation working together, we did well. Coming up with a programme for government, I wrote the programme for government between 1 and 3:30 in the morning, and in the first week of being elected Chief Minister, I sold it to the Council of Ministers, met with Tynwald, and we had workshops, and they came up with their ideas, and we interwove that. And therefore having a policy where people know what your government's working for, where key performance indicators and who's going to take responsibility, it hadn't been done before. And as a result, I think that's why we've been able to get so much done, because we were being held to account. Obviously some things have slipped which we hoped to do, but COVID was all consuming. It's been 14 months of 7 days a week, I should say, flat out long hours, 10 to 16 hour days, regularly 16-hour days at certain phases, and therefore little things have slipped in the programme for government. But I suppose those three things from a national point of view, the personal two things I'm the proudest of is laying a wreath at the cenotaph, first Manx person ever to do that, to represent your country when you've got behind you are pictures of two of my great uncles who fought in World War One. One sadly didn't come back. I had a number of others too, and obviously leading Tynwald off the hill on Tynwald Day as Chief Minister. But I think there are a number of other things. The equality legislation, which I started when I was Minister for Health and Social Care and was able to take forward in this administration, opening Manannan Court. When I came into politics, the island didn't have a mental health strategy.
I'd like to touch on some of your relationships with your colleagues in the House of Keys and Legislative Council. In January 2018, the then Health Minister, Kate Beecroft, says she was forced to resign. In June that year, there were highly publicised a private meeting where the 4 newly elected all-female members of the Legislative Council were told not to rock the boat. That was highly reported at the time. There are no women in ministerial positions, and there are a good number of female MHKs. Do you have an issue working with women?
No, my first boss was a woman, so none whatsoever. It's just when I built the Council of Ministers up, there was only one woman in politics who'd been in politics before, and we brought her into the fold as the Health Minister. Sadly, she wasn't forced to resign. I had to sack Mrs Beecroft. It wasn't an enjoyable experience, but half the department members had resigned, including one woman, and the other half threatened to resign if she hadn't been sacked because it just clearly wasn't going anywhere. And there was another woman. So off a team of 4 backbenchers on the department at the time, 2 men, 2 women, 2 had resigned and 2 said they would walk if I didn't do something about the situation. And clearly there was a situation. I gave my full support to Mrs Beecroft to try and develop the job, but clearly it wasn't working. She lost the support of Tynwald. I had numerous letters from people of the north of the island following a disastrous public meeting regarding Ramsey District Cottage Hospital, and we had to part our ways. So she was the only, at the time, woman politician, and therefore you can't bring in new ones straight away, which is why, I'm more than happy to have a Council of Ministers totally dominated by women if they're the right people. I don't put people in based on their sex, it's on their capability. Now, there are a number of women in this House who are more than capable of being ministers in the next administration. They've been given roles to do in various departments to get experience. And the next Chief Minister, whoever that they will be able to, I'm sure, have a far better balance than I was able to achieve. But I'm not into tokenism.
Well, within your tenure then, you touched on the Equality Act. Do you think your tenure reflects the core principles of that Act?
Yeah, well, if you analyse the reduction in the gap between women's salaries and men's salaries, that has been coming down regularly in the Quayle administration. It's far better than in the United Kingdom. So that's worked well. Obviously, we've brought in disability regulations. It's still early days as the changes are being made, but the first, as Confucius would say, the first hardest part of any journey are the first steps, and we've taken those steps.
You're listening to Agenda with me, Alex Wotton.
Touching on the steam packet, and I won't go into too much detail because I know you've discussed this quite a lot already, and I know you're waiting on the results of the independent review, which you of course called for, but considering there does appear to have been at some stage down the line a breakdown in communication between the company, public health and government, why weren't you aware of what was going on? Or why weren't you more involved in the discussions?
Well, you have to remember the role of a politician is to come up with policy. And then the role of your civil service and officers and the rest of the team is to deliver on that policy. So as a Council of Ministers, we came up with a number of strategies on how we were going to deal with COVID, and then you pass on to the team what you're going to do. So you have to remember when initially the steam packet were given their instructions from our public health and the Chief Secretary and direction notices, we as a Council of Ministers were dealing with acquiring PPE. Where we're going to get PPE for if you remember at the time what was happening in the world, getting PPE for the people providing frontline services, getting oxygen to the Isle of Man, getting oxygen generation equipment, getting a ward converted ready for COVID. We had all those things going on.
All coming on and off the island via the steam packet.
Well, that's right. And if you analyse, the policy worked down well on the steam packet for passengers coming through, that the staff wore the PPE when they were dealing with members of the public. But obviously something went wrong behind the scenes a year after. Now, we always knew COVID would come back to the island, whether it be someone not following their quarantine rules properly or this situation. You cannot stop all risk. We had...
But it appears that people in positions like yours weren't aware of just how much risk there was.
Well, we knew there was risk, but we had believed that there was mitigation put in place to reduce that risk. So you can't stop risk totally, but we were led to believe that all the staff, whilst on board, were wearing PPE for the full journey whenever they left. And we were told in meetings once we realised there was a case that steam packet staff were isolating when they came home, not their families, because that would have been impossible for their families to be in permanent lockdown with children going to school, etc. But that when they were working their shifts, they had to isolate. Now, it became clear that following a briefing that I did, having been told by officers that was what was expected, and Dr. Hewitt confirmed that in the briefing, that we then found out that the steam packet felt that wasn't their understanding of the situation. And that day I went and saw the Chief Secretary and asked for an independent review to let me know what was going on, because it was really important that we learnt. We found out what had happened, and B, we learnt from it, so that A, it didn't happen again during our watch, and B, throughout this pandemic, I haven't been able to go to a manual to pull off a shelf and say this is what you do with such and such a situation. I think it's important that if we get an outbreak in the future, the next Chief Minister or the one after that can look at what were the problems, what went wrong, how did they fix them, and learn from our problems. And that's what the independent review is about, which will hopefully tell me what went wrong, and I hope to get it at the end of this week.
The question really, though, is why did it take until then for you to know what was going on? That came up in a public coronavirus media briefing.
Well, because politicians don't get involved in the day, and shouldn't get involved in the day-to-day running of any job. You as politicians are there to come up with policy and to lead.
But to enforce.
Yes, officers, the people who have the relevant roles, they go off and deliver on what you've asked to be done. You should never micromanage government, otherwise you won't get on with anything. Politicians clearly don't get involved in the actual day-to-day running of things, the minutiae. That's what the officers are there for. Now, obviously, something has gone wrong. If council could have done something better, myself could have done something better, then of course we'll put our hands up. But let's wait and see what the report says. But let's not forget that the Isle of Man has one of the best records in the world, not just for its vaccination programme, not just for its testing and tracing. We were 8th in the world at one stage when we needed to be flat out with our testing, but for the amount of time that the people of the Isle of Man have been able to live a normal life. So yes, the outbreak as a result of an employee catching COVID on the steam packet was most regrettable, but given what's been happening around us, if you look at the Seychelles at the moment, they've had to shut down again, a similar island in population size to us. The Isle of Man has done fantastically well, but that's because that's not just government, that's the officers working in government and also the public working together. Steam packet was a problem, but I sometimes think it's been blown out of the water because you cannot stop COVID coming back to the island.
At times, you've had what some could describe as a difficult relationship with the media. How would you define the relationship that you feel that you've had with media?
With quite a few really good. There's quite a few I trust. I get really cross when the media sensationalise something and maybe don't report the truth and in the headline. The headline is sensationalised, and then maybe 15 paragraphs down, the full details of the story are there, which is not relevant to what the headline is, and the headline can upset people. And I then get bombarded by people saying, "What on earth have you done this for?" And I said, "Well, have you seen the rest of the article?" And people tend to read headlines and not necessarily look into the details. So I have no agenda. I didn't come in to make a career out of politics. I came into this job and as an MHK to try and make the island a better place for the next generation, and therefore I suppose I get upset when I see unfair criticism. If I've done something wrong, I'm more than happy to hold my hands up and say, look, yeah, take it on the chin. It's one of those things. But when you get criticised because someone's looked for a sensational headline, that really upsets me, because in my view, you're damaging the island. And I'm not bothered about my career because I never intended to have a career in politics. So I feel that that's when you're damaging your island, not me, and that's when I get upset. But equally, I have some very good relationships with members of the media, and some good friendships that stretch back a long way.
Your relationship with the UK over Brexit, you've talked about this already. You've spent a lot of time as well over the last 5 years travelling to various parts of the UK with a real focus on that Brexit transition period. You called it one of your biggest successes. Do you think away being so much, though, will have detracted in any way of focusing on local issues?
No, because we had a programme for government. It was really important. All the key problems facing the island and the next key problem are all off island. That's where there's thousands of jobs at risk, people's livelihoods, people's futures, the capacity to be able to bring in income to fund our health service, our children's education. So that has to be done. That's absolutely key. But I've got a council of ministers who all run their departments, Timwell members, quite a few of them on departments, and they're all working together to that common goal, which was the programme for government. So that programme for government keeps everything going. And whilst I do my best to be on the island as much as possible, I think it's really important that you deal with the biggest threats, which do tend to be off island. That's not trying to play down some of the problems on island, but the enormity of the problems off island that could impact the island are significant.
We've already talked a lot about quite just how much has happened in the last 5 years, 10 years really, if you begin your sort of 2 terms. What's the biggest lesson, do you think, that you've learnt over that time?
I suppose it's listening and not trying to be not impatient. I suppose in your own business world, you just get on with it. If you make a decision to do something, you just get on and do it. And if it goes right, well, you benefit. And if it goes wrong, you financially suffer. In politics, you have to sell it to a number of other people, and it can take an awful lot longer to get on and do something than you would in your own life, and you just need to accept that and ensure that everything is done properly and open and transparent, but never give up just because it's taken longer than you want to. But you do meet some lovely people in this job, and one of the most moving things has been, back to COVID, is reading out the stories of what people have done to help their fellow Manxies on the island, the fellow residents, whether it being delivering food that they've cooked, or going out shopping, or little girls painting NHS rainbows on stones and selling them. The goodness that came out of COVID, I bowled me over, and that's been something. So you're learning all the time about what's out, because you can get a little bit dispirited sometimes in the job when you're getting a bashing, but realising just, the goodness that's out there on the island is that's been really rewarding.
How do you think you'll be remembered?
Hopefully as hard-working. I've given it my all. I've given it my best. It's a bit of fun with the Howard o'clock. You can see here, this is just a snapshot of cards that I've had from members of the public. I've got a shed load at home and loads of messages. So as we've gone through the COVID outbreak, so you can't. I know there's one thing I've learned in politics: you can't please everyone, and you've just got to do your best and stick with your convictions. That's what the people of Middle elected me to do. I've given it my best shot. I hope I'll be favourably remembered, but I didn't come in to be popular in politics. I came in to work with others to make some tough decisions so that the next generation... I'm a big believer in intergenerational fairness, and I hope long term I'll be judged favourably, that we handed over, if you park the COVID incident, we handed over an economy that was balanced, a public sector pension that had been dealt with going forward. There was the liability that had already been accrued, which you can't take away. You've got to work on with that liability. And internationally, and dealing with Westminster and further afield, hopefully raised the profile of the island, and hopefully the next Chief Minister will have a good springboard for them to take the island even higher.
What advice would you have for that next Chief Minister? It's going to be an interesting time to take over.
Yeah, be yourself, I think is key, and try and make time for your family.
What will be the biggest challenge for the next administration, do you think?
0-10. Beyond a shadow. There'll be lots of other issues which may seem major to people's lives, but it's back to, if the Isle of Man has an economy that sells itself on tax efficiency, and we have businesses here, and we've got 1.8% unemployment, and that's even with COVID. I think when I took over as Chief Minister, the unemployment rate was just under 600. It's pre-COVID, it was 300 and something. It's now 751. We've got low unemployment compared with the UK, and if we want to keep that, and if we want well-paid jobs, then we have to have a unique selling point, and well-regulated is absolutely key, and that's a position myself and previous Chief Ministers have worked to ensure the Isle of Man is seen as a well-regulated jurisdiction. We are tax efficient, rates are low, corporation tax is low, and that's where the challenges are at the moment, that moving forward we need to, and we've already started working and looking at the way that's going, but that will be the biggest challenge to the Isle of Man, to make sure it comes out in a good position.
Just finally, do you have a person in mind that you would like to pick up this mantle?
Well, I hope it's one of the ministers. I firmly believe you can't go from being a backbencher to a Chief Minister. There's so much to learn and experience to be gained. So I think there are a number of ministers who are more than capable of being Chief Minister, and I wish whoever they are all the best.
Thank you for listening to this special edition of Agenda, speaking to the now outgoing Chief Minister Howard Quayle, talking highs, lows and all the in-between. If you'd like to listen again, this will be available as a podcast via manxradio.com, and you can also listen and watch a number of interviews, videos and stories about the upcoming election, and that's all at Manx Radio's general election page. In the meantime, Ewan Gaughan will be back with you for next week's episode at the same time, so for now it's goodbye from me and have a very good evening.